My name is Emily Parker. I'm 29, born and raised in the Boston suburbs, in a house where my brother Michael could do no wrong and where every disagreement ended with someone reminding me to stay in my lane. I learned early that my lane was narrow, monitored, and never allowed to run parallel to his. On Christmas Eve, the truth of that came printed in black ink. My father slid a single sheet of paper across the kitchen island like he was delivering a court summons. "Apologize to Michael for accusing him of plagiarism," he said, tapping the paper, "or we stop paying for your degree." My mother clung to my brother's arm as if he were the wounded party, whispering, "She gets jealous whenever she falls behind. Just ignore her, sweetheart." Neither of them knew the Georgetown acceptance letter with a full scholarship was already in my backpack. Neither of them knew that at exactly 8 a.m. the next morning, the truth would detonate across Harvard Medical School and every hospital Michael had ever touched. Christmas morning smelled like coffee and panic. I stood in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes I'd packed the night before. The wallpaper still had faint tape marks from the college acceptance posters I once hung proudly, before my parents replaced them with Michael's Harvard memorabilia to inspire me. Downstairs, I heard the muffled chaos of my family's world shrinking. A notification pinged, then another and another. Michael's voice echoed up the staircase, sharp and rising. "Mom, Dad, something's wrong with my inbox." I didn't move. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening. While he spiral refreshed his email downstairs, I traced the last 3 days in my head like stepping stones leading to this morning. 3 days before Christmas, I discovered the fraud. A medical journal featuring a section of my thesis, my exact sentences, my diagrams, published under Michael's name. 2 days before Christmas, in the quiet of our kitchen, my parents delivered their private threat. My mother crossed her arms, and my father didn't bother lowering his voice. "If you keep attacking your brother, we will reconsider paying for your degree." Christmas Eve, the threat became public. 30 relatives gathered around the long dining table, silverware clinking until I stood up, heart pounding under my sweater, and laid out my evidence. Michael played the wounded genius, my parents played the outraged protectors, and the ultimatum was delivered again. Louder, cleaner, crueler. Now it was Christmas morning. The morning everything they'd ignored, dismissed, or blamed on me began arriving in Michael's inbox in neat digital packets. From the hallway, I heard my father's footsteps pacing, then stumbling. My mother's voice cracked with a tremor I had never heard before. "What does it mean? Why is Harvard writing? Why is the hospital involved?" I sat on the edge of my bed, letting their panic settle like dust over old memories. One surfaced first, our high school science fair. Michael won, and my parents booked a banquet room at a hotel to celebrate. When I placed second 2 years later, they mentioned it over lukewarm takeout pizza. "Good job, Em," my dad said, already turning back to ask Michael about his plans for MIT. Favoritism wasn't a theory in our home. It was family tradition. And maybe that's why finishing my degree at 29 wasn't shameful to me. It was survival. Years of juggling part-time jobs and night classes, rebuilding a future I wasn't sure I deserved but refused to surrender. Downstairs, a chair scraped hard against the kitchen tile. Michael's voice cracked. "Dad, please, do something." I exhaled slowly, not because I doubted myself, but because the moment had finally arrived, the moment when truth no longer needed defending. It simply needed space. My father stormed up the stairs, red-faced, holding the ultimatum paper from last night like it still held power. "Emily," he said, "are you ready to apologize?" I looked at him, at the man who had told me to stay in my lane for 29 years, without ever noticing he'd built the lane entirely around my brother. I stood, zipped my backpack, and met his eyes. Okay, 3 nights before Christmas, I was sitting alone in the university library scrolling through medical journals, making sure every line of my thesis matched my sources. My eyes were tired, my coffee was cold, and I just wanted to get through one more article before going home. Then I saw it. My own words staring back at me under my brother's name. Not similar ideas, not parallel thinking, not inspired by. My exact sentences, my enzyme diagrams, down to the labels I had invented. Entire paragraphs lifted word for word, published in a respected medical journal 6 months ago, long before I submitted my drafts to my advisor. For a full 5 seconds, I couldn't breathe. The cursor blinked on the screen like it was waiting for permission to confirm what my brain refused to process. "No," I whispered. "No. No way." I pulled up my files, compared timestamps, ran a plagiarism checker, 100% match, the kind of match that doesn't happen by accident. My hands were shaking as I printed the side-by-side comparison. By the time I walked into Michael's old bedroom, now a shrine to Harvard prestige, I wasn't angry anymore. I was ice. He was sitting at his desk, polishing some award. He didn't even turn around when he said, "Em, you need something?" I laid the printouts in front of him. "What is this?" I asked, voice steady. He scanned the papers, smirked, leaned back in his chair, and laced his fingers behind his head like he was posing for a magazine cover. "You're being dramatic," he said. "Research builds on research. That's how academia works." "Michael," I said, tapping the side-by-side columns. "This is my thesis, my draft, my exact structure. You didn't build on anything. You copied it." He finally looked at me, really looked, and something dark flickered behind his eyes. "Emily," he said slowly, "no one is going to believe that you came up with this before me." He gestured around the room. Harvard diplomas, medical residency certificates, stacks of journals with his name printed in bold font across the byline. "I'm the doctor. I'm the one with the career. You're what? A part-time student finishing a degree at 29? It wasn't the words that stung. It was the ease with which they slid out of his mouth, like he'd been rehearsing them his whole life. "I have timestamps. I have drafts. I have emails," I said. He shrugged. "And I have Harvard and a future. If it comes down to your word against mine, guess who people choose?" Then his tone dropped, low and poisonous. "Besides, if you start making wild accusations, I'll have to tell Mom and Dad you're unstable, emotional. You know how they worry about you." I stared at him, stunned. The brother I grew up idolizing, my supposed role model, wasn't just a liar. He was a predator with a smile. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye, a drawer slightly ajar, a red folder inside. I pulled it out. Inside was my original draft, the one I'd only saved on my university drive, the one no one should have had access to unless they logged into my account. My heart lurched. "You were in my files," I said. He didn't deny it. Instead, he stood, walked toward me slowly, and pressed a hand to the door, blocking my exit. Michael took one slow step toward me, lowering his voice the way he always did, right before he twisted the knife. Be serious. You really think anyone's going to buy this?" He motioned around the room, his framed diplomas, the awards, the bound journals lined up like character witnesses. "Look at my life. Look at yours. They'll say you're overwhelmed, jealous, slipping. Honestly, Mom already does." He reached past me and pressed a hand against the door, not rough, but intentional, enough to make it clear I wasn't leaving until he was finished. "I'm trying to keep this from blowing up in your face. Don't make me tell people you're having some kind of episode." He paused, letting the word hang there like a diagnosis. I didn't move, neither did he. Then softer, almost kind. "Just let it go, okay? You won't win this. You know you won't." What started as one stolen paper cracked open into something much bigger. 2 nights after confronting Michael, I barely slept. My laptop stayed open on the bed. Tabs scattered everywhere. Old journals, archived competitions, forgotten student projects. Every link I clicked seemed to lead to another pattern, another questionable achievement, another moment in his past that suddenly made too much sense. By 3 a.m., the first night, the pattern was undeniable. In high school, his award-winning science fair project matched an obscure submission from a student in Minnesota. Same methodology, same chart labels, same conclusion. Different title, same everything else. In college, he had breakthrough work professors adored. But the further I dug, the more I found nearly identical papers in international journals published just months earlier. English versions didn't exist yet. He'd counted on professors not being able to read Korean or German. In medical school, things escalated. Collaboration projects mysteriously became solo submissions under his name. Group members were quietly pushed aside right as deadlines hit. Their contributions vanished. His resume soared. By residency, the strategy turned surgical. Michael had used saved passwords from our family laptop to access my university account multiple times. The timestamps lined up perfectly with the drafts that appeared later in his publications. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft with intent and planning. And then came the night I opened a file that made my stomach drop. A resident at his hospital, someone I didn't know, had competed for the same prestigious fellowship Michael bragged about last spring. The resident didn't get it. The committee said he lacked originality. But sitting on my screen was the original research that resident had done. Dated months before, Michael submitted a nearly identical paper under his own name. He'd done to someone else exactly what he'd done to me, and it had cost that man his career trajectory. My hands were shaking as I kept reading. Buried in hospital documentation was a protocol Michael had submitted for testing a specific cardiac medication on elderly patients. The math was flawless on paper, but only because it wasn't his math. The real calculations in the original research recommended a much lower dose. Michael had doubled it without understanding why the numbers mattered. A 70-year-old woman had almost bled internally. The only reason she survived was because another doctor noticed the inconsistencies and adjusted the medication in time. I stared at the screen until the text blurred. Michael wasn't just stealing, he was endangering real people. This wasn't academic dishonesty, it was malpractice waiting to explode. Downstairs, I could hear my father's voice echoing in memory. Michael will be chief of cardiology before 35. He'd said it at every cookout, every holiday, every birthday party. To him, Michael's success was a reflection of his own. My mother called it pride. I always thought it sounded more like possession. And now I knew what it was built on. Later that afternoon, I confronted Michael again. Not with fear this time, just cold, documented truth. I laid out the stolen fellow residents' research, the mismatched protocol math, the login evidence. People could have died, I said quietly. Michael stared at the papers, then looked up with a flat, emotionless calm that chilled me more than anger ever could. It looked impressive on the CV, he said. Just that. No remorse, no hesitation. When I stepped back, he moved faster than I expected. The door slammed behind me, his hand locking it. His other hand hit the wall, inches from my face, hard enough to rattle the frames. "Stop digging," he said. Each word clipped, controlled, vibrating with a kind of fury that came from entitlement, not fear. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about family, reputation, or rivalry. Someone like him would keep doing this forever if no one stopped him. And suddenly the weight of it hit me. This wasn't a sibling conflict. It wasn't even a personal betrayal. It was a public safety issue, and I was the only one holding the truth. Christmas Eve dinner in my family always looked like a magazine spread, linen tablecloths, polished silver, candles tall enough to cast cathedral shadows. 30 relatives filled the long dining room, laughing too loudly, bragging too easily, the whole house arranged to make Michael shine a little brighter than everyone else. I sat near the end of the table, the seat I'd taken since childhood. Michael, of course, sat in the center like some crown prince. When dessert plates were being cleared, I knew it was time. I stood. Conversations faltered. Forks clinked against china. My uncle paused mid-joke. 30 faces turned toward me, puzzled, mildly annoyed, not expecting anything important to come from my side of the table. Without a word, I reached into my tote bag and pulled out 20 neatly bound packets. Side-by-side comparisons. My work on the left, Michael's published research on the right, identical. I handed them out, one stack at a time, like distributing evidence in a courtroom. By the time I reached the head of the table where my parents sat, the room was silent. All you could hear was the slow rustling of paper as people flipped pages. My grandfather, an engineer who believed in documentation above emotion, put on his glasses and leaned forward. My aunt's face blanched. My cousin whispered, "Oh my God." Then Michael spoke. He let out a soft, trembling breath and wiped at the corner of his eye, performing grief like he'd practiced it. "I can't believe this," he said, voice breaking perfectly. "I've been trying to help Emily. She's been so stressed, so overwhelmed. I told her to get counseling. I had no idea it was this bad." Karen gasped dramatically and placed a hand over her chest. Several relatives muttered in sympathy toward him. My father shot to his feet, the legs of his chair screeching across the hardwood. "Emily!" His voice cracked through the room like a warning. "That is enough!" He jabbed a finger toward Michael, then back at me. "Your brother has done nothing but carry this family's name with dignity. And you—" He shook his head, disbelief turning to anger. You choose Christmas Eve to pull this?" He moved closer, jaw set like stone. "You apologize, right now, or we are done paying for your degree. Do you hear me?" A beat. "We're done. Completely. Don't push me on this." Michael stared at me over the rim of his water glass, eyes shining, not with tears, but with triumph. The kind of triumph born from years of getting away with everything because no one ever questioned him. I could feel 30 sets of eyes pressing into me. The weight of years of favoritism, excuses, blind loyalty, the suffocating expectation that I should fold again because it was easier for everyone if I just stayed quiet. My father wasn't done. His hand slammed on the table. I have had enough of this nonsense. You apologize tonight or we stop paying. That's it. I'm done. There it was. The public ultimatum. Not whispered in a kitchen this time. Not said behind closed doors. They wanted obedience in front of witnesses. Karen pulled me aside, her grip tight on my arm. Why can't you let your brother succeed? She hissed. Why do you always drag him down with your insecurities? My insecurities, not the theft, not the plagiarism, not the danger to patients. My insecurities. I looked at her, then at the room, then at Michael. He lifted his chin slightly. Silent, smug, daring me to break. And I realized he believed with absolute certainty that I would. I walked back to the center of the room. Every gaze locked onto me like the house itself was holding its breath. I met Michael's eyes. All right, I said. 2 words, calm, even, sharp as glass. He smiled like he'd won. He had no idea what the words really meant. They thought my all right was surrender. They didn't know it was the final click in a 5-month plan. 5 months earlier, long before Christmas, long before the dining room showdown, I'd started compiling proof. Not theories, not suspicions. Proof. Timestamps showing exactly when my drafts were created. Metadata from every version Michael had touched. Login logs proving unauthorized access into my university account from our family laptop. Screenshots of journal comparisons, each pair more damning than the last. A full section documenting the resident whose fellowship had been stolen out from under him because Michael recycled his work. 200 pages in total, indexed, numbered, cross-referenced, an academic misconduct report that would make any review committee stop breathing. I didn't send anything yet. I waited, watched, documented more. Every smile Michael gave when someone praised his genius only sharpened my resolve. By the time Christmas morning arrived, I knew exactly what I needed to do. At 7:59 a.m., I sat alone at my childhood desk with a cup of coffee and my laptop open. My room still smelled faintly of the lavender detergent my mother used when I was 12. Somehow that made hitting the send button even easier. 8 a.m. 1 click. 3 destinations: Harvard Medical School's Academic Integrity Office, Massachusetts General Hospital's Residency Program, and the State Medical Board. No drama, no instant consequences, just 3 emails disappearing into the system. Harvard responded first, but not in a cinematic way, just an automated reply. Your submission has been received. MGH sent a short acknowledgement confirming they'd logged the documents. The medical board stayed silent. I knew their queue could take days. From downstairs, I heard Michael telling everyone everything was fine. Auto replies don't mean anything, he said, voice still smooth. If this were real, Harvard would have called immediately. My father agreed, relieved to cling to whatever made the world feel normal again. My mother kept reassuring herself aloud. They haven't accused him of anything. They haven't called. They haven't done anything. It was almost peaceful watching denial try to hold the house together. I didn't correct them. I didn't explain how academic investigations actually work. I didn't mention that Harvard's process typically takes 48-72 hours to decide whether a preliminary review is warranted. Instead, I zipped my backpack and quietly told the truth. To the only people I owed it to. The viewers listening to my story. I had already signed a lease on an apartment in D.C. I had a full scholarship from Georgetown that didn't require a cent from my parents. I had been financially independent for years. They just never noticed because they were too busy funding Michael. Their ultimatum meant nothing. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't dependent, and I definitely wasn't waiting for their permission to leave. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 3rd evening, when the tree lights were still blinking and my relatives were packing leftovers, Michael's phone buzzed with a tone I recognized instantly, the Harvard system notification. He glanced at it casually, then froze. His face drained so fast it looked like someone had cut power to his skin. He opened the email. I could see the reflection of the text in his glasses as he read, "Preliminary review has begun." His hand shook. The Harvard mug he was holding slipped from his fingers and shattered against the tile, pieces scattering like teeth across the floor. My father rushed toward him. What? What is it? Michael, what is it? Michael didn't answer. He just stared at the screen like it was the first time in his life he'd encountered a world he couldn't talk his way out of. A second email arrived before he even recovered from the first. Harvard requested a Zoom meeting within the next 72 hours. The house went silent, not stunned, horrified, because everyone finally understood. This wasn't going away. This wasn't family drama. This was the beginning of something none of them could stop. The Parker house turned into a waiting room for consequences. No one said it out loud, but every light left on past midnight. Every whisper in the hallway, every forced smile over reheated leftovers carried the same question. What happens next? The first week after Christmas belonged to Harvard. Michael sat through 2 Zoom meetings with the Academic Integrity Office, each more clinical and less forgiving than the last. They asked for raw data from his published studies, research logs from the last 3 years, and full email history tied to every submission he'd ever made. He tried to charm them. He always did. But charm doesn't work on committees built entirely on documentation. By the end of week 1, Harvard placed him on administrative leave. Not suspension, not yet, but the step right before it, a holding pattern that told everyone exactly how serious things were. 10 days later, the email came. Official suspension pending full investigation. Michael slammed his laptop shut when he read it, but the sound didn't make the problem disappear. Meanwhile, Massachusetts General Hospital received a transfer of my report from Harvard. Within days, they issued their own notice. All clinical protocols with Michael's name were temporarily suspended pending internal review. Every attending physician in his department got the same message. They even contacted the 70-year-old patient he'd nearly harmed with the doubled medication dose, framed as a routine follow-up review. But I knew exactly why they were calling. MGH sent him a separate email requesting a written explanation of his medical judgment in that case. He stared at the screen for a long time before saying quietly, "They think I caused harm." No one responded. 2 weeks after Christmas, the state medical board finally acknowledged receipt of my file. Initial case review opened, interview to be scheduled in February. The phrasing was dry, official, terrifying, the kind of phrasing that destroys careers slowly and thoroughly. That same week, insurance lawyers contacted my parents. Because they had co-signed part of Michael's educational loans, they were now considered relevant parties in the event of recovery actions. My mother nearly dropped the phone. My father kept insisting it was a misunderstanding, his voice too sharp, too desperate. Our relatives started switching sides. One by one, they asked to see my packet. They read each page carefully, silently, the way people study an X-ray that finally explains years of unexplained pain. They didn't apologize. Not yet. But their eyes softened. By the end of the second week, everyone who had mocked me on Christmas Eve was suddenly very quiet. Douglas struggled the most. He called every contact he had, old colleagues, church friends, alumni buddies. But each conversation ended the same way, a long pause, a vague excuse, and someone politely backing away. One friend finally told him the truth he didn't want to hear. "Doug, once Harvard opens a case, nobody touches it. You need to understand that." 3 to 5 weeks after Christmas, the worst blow landed. Harvard sent a formal letter, intent to revoke degree. Michael was required to submit a full rebuttal and prepare for possible repayment of $253,000, subject to final determination. Douglas nearly dropped his phone. For the first time, he understood this wasn't an inconvenience. This was a collapse. His son's degree, reputation, and financial future were on the line, and the fallout was pulling the whole family with it. That night, Karen came to my room. I'd always known her pride was bone deep, but I'd never seen it crack. She knelt on the carpet in front of me, hands clasped. "Please, fix this before it goes too far. Family first. He's your brother." I didn't move. I didn't speak, because there was nothing to fix, only truth revealing itself. A few days later, a new email arrived from Boston PD, a formal notice and a physical letter in the mailbox. Michael was required to appear for an initial criminal interview in 2 weeks. Douglas read the message 3 times, his face graying more each time. "What does this mean for Michael?" he whispered. No one answered. The house had stopped pretending. This was only the beginning. By the time Michael returned from Boston, Harvard's decision was no longer a threat, it was a countdown. He walked through the front door like someone had carved pieces out of him and left the edges raw. His duffel bag slipped off his shoulder and hit the floor with a heavy thud that echoed across the hallway. For almost 2 months, every week had delivered a new blow. Harvard's review process stretched through January into early February. Multiple hearings, committee sessions, documentation requests that kept expanding. Michael tried to act confident at first, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that Harvard couldn't possibly take action against someone with his record, but confidence has a shelf life. The final decision arrived on a cold Thursday morning. Degree revoked. Not suspended, not corrected, revoked. Completely erased from the institution's records, pending repayment of funds after the final committee ruling. The letter was clinical, factual, merciless. Years of prestige vanished in a single paragraph. The medical board wasn't far behind. His interview had already been completed, the panel asking pointed questions about protocol decisions, mentorship, and authorship ethics. By the time early spring rolled around, the board issued its ruling, license revoked permanently. The wording was devastatingly simple, but the impact was irreversible. And the criminal case, that was the part none of us expected to move so quickly. What began as an initial review now escalated to formal case review assigned a prosecutor, matching the typical 1 to 3 month timeline for white-collar and medical fraud cases. It meant the situation was no longer a theoretical danger. It had entered the legal system's bloodstream. All of that landed on Michael before he even made it home. When he stepped into the living room, he looked older, thinner, and more volatile than I had ever seen him. "You destroyed my life!" he shouted the moment he saw me. His voice cracked into something unrecognizable. "I had everything, a future, a career. And you," he pointed at me with a shaking hand, "you ripped it away." I stayed seated, still, quiet, because nothing he'd lost was ever truly his. He lunged toward my desk, reaching for my laptop. "Give me that! Give me your files! I can fix this, I just need—" He didn't finish the sentence. Uncle Brian stepped between us with a force that surprised even him. "Absolutely not!" he snapped. "You're not touching anything!" Grandpa Parker rose from his armchair, his cane thudding against the floor. "This," he said firmly, "is criminal misconduct, and you know it." Michael's face twisted, anger, grief, denial all crashing together. His hands shook as he grabbed fistfuls of his own hair. "You think you're safe? You think this doesn't touch you?" His voice cracked. "If they come for me, I'm dragging you down too. I swear to God I will." The words were less a threat and more a final unraveling. He took one step toward me, then another. I backed up, but he was faster, fueled by panic, by the sudden realization that his entire life had imploded, and there was no version of reality where he walked out unchanged. His hand shot forward, and then a firm, heavy knock at the front door. Not the uncertain kind, the official kind. The entire house froze. Michael stopped mid-movement. Douglas stared down the hall, eyes wide. Karen pressed a hand over her mouth. Uncle Brian opened the door. 2 officers stood on the porch, the winter air swirling behind them. One held a folder, the other carried a standard notice envelope. "Is Michael Parker home?" the first officer asked. Michael stepped back like he'd been struck. His voice was barely audible. I'm here." The officer handed him the documents. "This is a formal notice. You are required to appear at the Boston Police Department tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for a continued criminal interview as part of an ongoing case review. Tomorrow, not soon, not sometime next month. Tomorrow at 9. The papers trembled in Michael's hands. No one in the room moved. No one breathed. The countdown had reached 0. 6 months after the night the officers came to our door, I woke up to the quiet hum of the Georgetown Research Building and realized something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not triumph, not vindication. Just a steady, grounded peace that came from knowing I was finally standing in a life I chose, not one I had to survive. My morning started early now. The lab was always cold at 6 a.m., the kind of cold that made every sound sharper. Metal trays clicking into place, centrifuges warming up, the faint buzz of the lights overhead. I loved it. The clean, structured quiet. The sense of purpose. The feeling that the work in front of me was mine, entirely mine, built through years of nights no one else cared about and choices no one else saw. I scanned a slide under the microscope, adjusting the focus until the fluorescent markers came into view. A new line of research on targeted cancer therapy, deep, complex, the kind of work that demanded absolute honesty from the people doing it. I breathed slowly, letting the image sharpen. This was the first project in my life where my name on the file didn't feel like a risk. It felt right. At 8:12 a.m., my email chimed. The journal notification appeared first. Your manuscript has been accepted for publication, the kind of sentence that erases years of self-doubt in an instant. A few minutes later, another email came through, a voice memo from Dr. Valdez, my department head. He didn't usually send recordings, so seeing his name lit on my screen made my heart kick. "Emily," his voice began, warm and steady. "I wanted to congratulate you personally. Your integrity during the investigation, and your work here, has not gone unnoticed. I'll be writing your MD-PhD recommendation letter this week. You've earned every step you're taking." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting his words settle into the places inside me that had once been shaped entirely by comparison. Once my achievements had been held up next to Michael's, always found smaller by a family who refused to see anything but their golden son. Now there was no comparison, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stepped out of the competition I never signed up for. My parents were in therapy now. They'd started going after the second criminal interview, the one where the prosecutor explained that Michael's case was being formally prepared for review by a grand jury. It didn't mean charges were guaranteed. It meant the process was real, documented, monitored. My parents hadn't been able to hide from that. In the beginning, therapy made them defensive, then exhausted, then quiet. Now, 6 months later, they spoke less in absolutes, more in questions. Sometimes they sent short messages. "Thinking of you. Hope you're well." They never asked me to forgive them quickly. That was the first sign they understood how deep the damage had gone. I didn't shut them out, but I no longer shaped myself around their reactions. Healing, I learned, wasn't the same thing as returning to old patterns. Some bridges stayed standing, some stayed burned. Some would be rebuilt only when the foundations were safe again. Michael didn't live in Boston anymore. After Harvard's degree revocation became official, after the board permanently revoked his license, after the hospital cut ties completely, he moved to Pittsburgh. He worked at a small insurance office processing claims. Monotonous, structured, low stakes. A job where no one cared about brilliance, only accuracy. He went to therapy too, court recommended, and from what I heard, he was showing up, talking, unraveling the entitlement he'd built his whole identity on. I didn't check on him directly, but I didn't root for his destruction either. I wanted accountability, not annihilation. Justice, not lifelong ruin. Consequences, not cruelty. Some people think revenge is about punishment. For me, it was never about that. It was about telling the truth in a place where lies had been allowed to flourish. It was about protecting people Michael could have harmed again. It was about stepping out of the shadow I was told to stay in and choosing myself without apology. One afternoon, as spring turned the campus bright and alive again, I walked past a group of first-year students celebrating exam results. Their laughter carried across the courtyard, light and hopeful. I felt something unfurl inside me, soft, unfamiliar, relief. For the first time, my future wasn't tied to Michael's. It wasn't tied to my parents' pride. It wasn't tied to anyone's expectations. It was mine. My story wasn't about bringing someone down. It was about standing up. Family loyalty without accountability is just silence dressed as love. Truth is expensive, but silence is far more costly. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people who taught you to doubt yourself and toward the life that waits on the other side of honesty. I'd love to know where in the world this story found you. Drop a comment and tell me. And if you haven't yet, a single click to subscribe only takes a few seconds, but gives me a huge boost to keep creating new videos. If you enjoyed this one, please hit like and share. Thank you so much for being here and listening.